Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Full Potential Live Show. I am Nick Wagner Sr., and I'm thrilled to be with Ari Santiago tonight, who you will learn quite a bit about in the next, say, 30 to 45 minutes. And we are doing this as we do every Sunday night live on LinkedIn and on YouTube, and then we will release this as a video on YouTube for you to watch. It'll be shown on LinkedIn for you to watch, and then we'll share it with all major podcast platforms, including Apple, Google, Spotify, etc. And we'll make sure we share that link out. And then Ari, we will also include in the show notes any links that you want us to share. So I'm assuming, we'll probably want to share your business, IT Direct's website, as well as the Made in America podcast link as well. So we'll share anything you want in the show notes in the description of this interview. So
appreciate that.
So every Sunday we sit down. I sit down with all different guests from all different industries to hear about their career stories. And started as a podcast. We're now doing it live, which is fun because we don't edit it now. All we do is edit out the beginning. All we do is edit the beginning where we have guests share the link with their followers, and then everything else is we'll say unscripted. So, so we share stories about people's career stories, and because in my opinion, you have quite a bit of amazing content coming from people hearing about what they've done throughout their careers. So, Ari, thank you for joining us tonight. Why don't I'll let you introduce yourself. So the way I usually ask guests to share is, if you don't go to a conference or you meet someone in the business world for the first time, what is your 2-minute who is Ari pitch when you meet people?
Well, I don't know if there's a 2-minute Ari pitch, and a lot of it probably depends on what the event is all about. Given that I do a few different things, but. Listen, I'd say the primary thing I do is, from a professional perspective, is president and CEO of IT Direct. That's been really my professional passion for that particular iteration of it for the last coming on 19 years. And it's been a really exciting adventure. And so, really that's what I do. And IT Direct is a technology success provider. We work with our clients to help them achieve success through their technology. Really, our mission is to help our clients gain a competitive advantage by harnessing the power of technology to reach their business goals. That's what we focus on doing every single day. That's what drives our success, and that's what's powered us to do and be as successful as we have been.
And so you're an entrepreneur. You're a small business owner, which, as you know, there are many of those across this great country of ours. And we'll get into how did that happen, right? So how did you become an entrepreneur? You've done it for quite a bit of time now. There's obviously been an evolution there, and then we'll also talk a little bit about you do a lot of philanthropic work, a lot of volunteering. Have a podcast, which is pretty well a podcast / video log, right? So we'll talk about that. But again, thanks for coming on. I think we're gonna have a lot of fun talking about your career, and again, I think every single time I have a guest on the show, people learn something from that person's career, which is what I love. So why don't we start? I like to kind of travel back in time when we do these and go back to when you were little Ari, right? So your little Ari, was your dream always to be an entrepreneur? Was that something that was in your blood or your family history was entrepreneurship, or was that not the original path you thought you were going to go on?
Listen, I mean, it's sort of hard to say. I mean, if you really look back, my great grandfather was kind of an entrepreneur, right? He came to this country from, I want to say, Romania, and ended up kind of saving up to buy a hardware store in Ansonia, Connecticut. But I think, as many immigrant family stories go, and I think probably most immigrant family stories go, certainly in my family, the idea was education was the ticket out. So for me, growing up, I looked around at my parents. My father was an attorney. My mother was a dentist. My grandfather, right? So my great grandfather had the hardware store, but my grandfather was an oral surgeon. My grandfather on the other side was an attorney. My aunts and uncles were doctors and attorneys, right? So growing up, looking ahead and thinking about what I wanted to be once I got out of the wanted to play shortstop or second base or third base for the Boston Red Sox. Once that kind of got out of my system, I thought I would probably be an attorney. That's what my dad was. So that was really what I thought I was going to do. Luckily, I changed my mind before I got all the way through that. But, if you look back at what I did, and I think it's really instructive, a lot of people will say, look at what people do, not what they say. And if you look at my life and you looked at what I did versus what I said, entrepreneurship and being a business owner and entrepreneur is probably what you would have thought I would do objectively. Probably the first thing I remember ever doing for money was buying Bazooka Joe bubblegum, like the box, the gross box, and then selling them, for a profit at school, selling blow pops at times. I would help with like a paper route. I did I caddied at the Hartford Golf Club. When I was 15, I started my first computer business. We used to build and sell computers. I started New Age Computing later in high school, which was effectively the precursor of IT Direct, where we used to service small businesses. So anyway, that goes on. And so IT Direct is, depending how you look at it, my fourth, fifth, sixth, or seventh business. But so I think if you looked at what I did, you'd say entrepreneurship was there the whole time.
Yeah, it's funny. My guest last week also sold candy like that he bought and then resold it. So I find it funny how many people that are entrepreneurs start off by selling candy in school, right?
Listen, you got to give the people what they want, Nick.
Yeah, I know. I mean,
and that's cool. That's right. That's right.
So let's talk about being an entrepreneur and what that meant, and so what did your parents think of that, right? Because you have all these pretty serious professions, attorneys and doctors and different things throughout the family. When you went that route, right? Because clearly they saw you probably had a passion for this, starting a business in high school. What did they think of that? Were they encouraging, or were they like, all right, this is a waste of your time? How did that conversation go?
No, listen, Nick, I'm super blessed. My family, my parents, and even my extended family have been just such a source of support for my entire life. I've been very fortunate that they've been supportive of what I wanted to do, even if it wasn't what they wanted me to do. Not to say that isn't without limits at times, but listen, when I started my first business, S&S Computing, where we were going to build and sell computers, I couldn't drive. So my mom drove us to the Secretary of State's office, helped me open my first bank account, helped me get little business cards. So, they've been very supportive. And, I told you my mom was a dentist, but she's been in private practice. Oh, she sold the practice now, I guess 2 years ago. So she's retired, but, she was in private practice from the early 80s. So, while she was a dentist, she was really an entrepreneur in some ways and owned her own business. And I was just very supportive of all of her kids. And I was no exception as the oldest, just doing what we wanted always when it was a positive thing. So I was very blessed in that regard.
So, no, and look, I think if you look back at people's careers, the people that they've surrounded themselves with either make or break them a lot, right? So clearly you had a lot of positive influences to help you. If your mom didn't care, she wouldn't have driven you to help incorporate the business and get a bank account, right? So clearly that's awesome that you had that support.
And Nick, I'll just throw one thing on top of that. Don't forget, after that, when we had to deliver computers or support them or do anything, we still couldn't drive. So, and this was like no Uber, right? So this was a lot of bumming rides for my parents or my partner at the time, Spencer's parents, to try and drop things off. So we were very blessed and fortunate to have supportive parents.
That's pretty awesome. So my next question is, we talked about why entrepreneurship, why IT, right? So I think IT for a lot of people is a passion, and then for the other half of America, or probably way more than half, is terrifying. It's expensive, and they get frustrated with it. Like they yell at their computer, they yell at their phone, right?
They yell at the people that want to help them with their computer or their phone.
Help them, right? They yell, you name it, right? People get frustrated with technology. So how did you end up as this IT person? How did you get into technology?
Yeah, so it's kind of an interesting story. I wasn't into it really much at all outside of maybe playing Atari as a kid. Which for any of the youngsters out there is a game console when that was a thing. But I was in 1991, actually February 12th, so it was an anniversary about 4 days ago, actually. I was in a skiing accident. I was on a ski trip with a winter break. I was on a ski trip with the JCC in West Hartford up in Stratton Mountain, and I just fell down. I was knocked unconscious and ended up sliding into some snowmaking equipment and was paralyzed. And sitting in that hospital room, it can get pretty boring pretty quickly. And I was just very fortunate, always had an active mind, and was just, again, kind of one of those life's fortunate things. My mom had a friend, or maybe my parents, I guess I should say, had a friend who was an anesthesiologist, I want to say, but sort of had a side passion for tinkering with computers. Now, don't forget, this is 91. So it's hard to imagine a time when everyone didn't have a computer and when every desk in the office didn't have a computer. But this was then, right? So this was, I mean, computers were a thing, but it was before Windows, right? So Windows didn't even exist yet, Microsoft Windows. And so we had this computer, which at the time was novel because it only had the small 3¼ inch floppy, not that giant 5¼ inch floppy, and it had a 20 megabyte hard drive. And so, not to get all nerdy on it, but I mean, 20 megabytes is such an insignificant amount of data today. It doesn't even register as a thing, but that was amazing. So,
well, yeah, to put it in perspective for people, an MP3, one song is usually less than 10 megs.
Correct. Yeah, one song's around maybe 3 to 5 megs. So
right.
I had a computer that could hold maybe 5 MP3s.
Pretty awesome.
I was lucky. Yeah, pretty amazing. But by the way, probably didn't have enough power or sound, by the way, to play those MP3s.
Right.
But yeah, but it was a small thing, and it was a kind of just called the shoebox. And he brought it to me, and I just started playing with it. And it's one of those weird twists of fate in life. Never really having used a computer much, I just sort of developed a knack for it, and it was Microsoft, it was DOS, right? So it wasn't Windows. So you really had to kind of teach yourself just to basically do anything. I mean, it booted up to like a little prompt with a blinking cursor, and I just sort of learned stuff, taught myself different things, and just became kind of enamored with the technology. And so don't forget, here's a kid who's a 4-season athlete, skis, swimming, basketball, baseball, soccer, right? Every weekend was spent rollerblading. It was just, that was my outdoors and sports was my life. And now all of that's really taken away really in the blink of an eye. And so now I have this new outlet. And so, that sort of kind of how I got into IT or how I got into computers, right? But just really quickly, how I got into IT as a business was, and this is again, where to your point, support is so important. I remember getting home, and I grew up in a house, I mentioned a doctor and a lawyer as parents, but we never had allowance. You were expected to like do the trash, set the table, make your bed, all that stuff. That was like rent, to live there. But if you wanted money, you had to work to get it. And so if I wanted to buy baseball cards or go to the movies or anything like that, that's where I would caddy for, caddy at the golf club, or maybe help someone on a paper route or sell candy or whatever. But when I got home, I thought, oh, this is going to be great. Now that I can't do any of those things anymore, my parents are just going to start giving me money. But they quickly disabused me of that false belief, and basically told me that no, I was going to have to kind of find a way to make money. And I remember sitting in the dining room when they told me this. I was like devastated. I was pretty sure I started crying. And my dad probably ends up leaving the room, and my mom's like, you could figure it out. And I was like, I don't even know what I would ever do. And she's like, well, you're pretty good with the computer. You probably could teach people how to use computers. And I'm like, teach people how to use computers? This is so easy. Who would ever need someone to teach them how to use a computer? I just figured this thing out in a bed, And so that was really the beginning. And so I started doing some research, and found out you could make money doing that. And by the way, compared to what you were getting lugging golf clubs around a golf course, you could get paid very handsomely.
Yeah.
And
that was how old? That was 15?
So yeah, 14. And I remember thinking to myself, well, how am I going to do this? So I started asking people, who do you know? You ask your parents, your grandparents. My grandfather knew a guy, lived up on the mountain in West Hartford, who had retired and wanted to write a memoir. And so I went over to teach him how to use the computer. And the poor guy was just overmatched by this computer. And I remember him telling me that every time he finished the first page of his memoir, it would lose the first part would get deleted. And I couldn't figure out what he was saying. So he's like typing and showing me. And when he gets to the bottom, it scrolls. Yeah. He's like, see, it's gone. And then I would like hit the up arrow, and the top would come back, and he's like, you just lost the bottom. It was like he couldn't understand how the words were like still in there. Yeah. That's how long ago this was. And I was going to charge him $20 for that first hour, which is an enormous amount of money at 14 years old in 1991. And I remember leaving after about an hour and 15 minutes, and he gave me a 50. And I was like, damn, I like this. So it was the combination of realizing there was a way to make money doing it, and my love for it that kind of came together there. And then it was just trial and error from then on out, pretty much.
So I love the story, but you know, about how you ended up having this passion for computers. But I want to pause and ask you. So you're in the skiing accident.
Yeah.
You're now paralyzed, which it's, you know, for our listeners, they can't see you. You're unable to walk, right?
Correct.
So you're in a wheelchair.
Yep.
You just talked about like the positives that came of this, but how did this affect you mentally at 14, right? You just said you were a 4-season athlete, right? Like you were extremely, you know, athletic. How did this, I mean, this fundamentally changed who you were for the rest of your life, right? I mean, what was there a point where this was like really like a dark moment for you, or did you really turn it into this positive thing with technology?
No, listen, man, you know, that's sort of the outcome now, right? But I think there was definitely some dark days. There's no question about that. I mean, you know, I remember waking up. So there's about 10 days that I don't really remember anything. And I wasn't in a coma. I was talking, but I think between sort of the trauma, you know, your body kind of knocks you out a little bit. Plus, of course, you know, morphine or whatever I was on.
Right.
You know, I don't remember any of those days. So the last thing I remember is arriving at the ski mountain that morning, and just randomly, I had recently got a new pair of Dynastar verticals, right? So this is like might be my second or third day using them. And I remember, you know, I don't know if they still have them. I haven't been to a mountain in a long time, but you used to be able to lock your skis up outside for like a quarter, and all the locks were gone. And I just remember asking my buddies, like, do you think it's safe to leave the skis? And they're like, yeah, it's fine. And I just literally remember holding the door open on the way into the lodge. Like, that's my last memory. And the next thing I know, in my own mind, nothing happening in between, it's pitch black. I hear this beeping, and they're wheeling me, which I find out later, out of intensive care into pediatrics. And I am in an enormous amount of pain and have no idea what's going on. So it was definitely weird. You know, I don't remember ever having the conversation about being paralyzed. I think I just kind of knew, or I mean, sure that someone told me at some point. And look, I mean, there was definitely some tough times. I think in the beginning, you know, you tell yourself, well, there's a good chance that they're wrong. You know, listen, I was 13 when it happened. I turned 14. So it happened in February 12th. I turned 14 March 24th. So just about 14. In the beginning, right, I'm thinking, nah, these guys don't know what they're talking about. You know, like I'm going to bounce back. You know, they're like, oh, it's a 98% chance. And I'm like, oh, I'm that 2%, you know. From the beginning, there's that. But you know, after a week or two, you start realizing you're probably not that 2%. And then it's tough. You know, it's tough. You kind of want to get better and you want to find out what your life is like. But in the beginning, dude, I was messed up. I mean, I had a giant gash in my head with, you know, 80, 90 stitches. I had broken a shoulder. I'd punctured both my lungs. I shattered my back. So like I was a mess. And so you know, breathing was hard. I mean, you know, the thought of wanting to get up and do something was what I wanted to do. And I was far from doing anything. So that was tough. And, you know, not to kind of keep circling back around, but I just was super fortunate with my family. You know, they stuck by me. You know, they were there. My mom, you know, was kind of policed the room, and she was like, I don't want any crying, you know, in front of Ari. Like if you're sad and you're upset, like cry out here. But when we go in there, you know, we got to put on that brave face and like, you know, that type of thing. And you know, came every day. You know, my grandparents came, my brothers came, aunts and uncles came, lots and lots of support, which was huge. And, you know, I remember distinctly being in Newington Children's Hospital, which is now CCMC. I remember wanting to give up one day and I just couldn't take it, man. Like it was a tough day. At this point I was moving around a little bit, but man, it's tough, dude. You're learning how to get dressed again, for the first time. You know, things you took for granted, brushing your teeth, like getting dressed, sitting up in bed, you know, like basic functions of life all of a sudden are arduous and difficult and start from scratch. And I just remember one day after like just a particularly grueling day, I don't remember entirely what happened, but just lying in bed and just sort of crying to my dad and just being like, I don't know how this is what's gonna happen, just basically pity party, And I just remember my dad, looking me square in the eye and just saying, listen, Ari, this accident didn't kill you. Don't let your fucking attitude kill you. And I just was like, first of all, mad. I was like, how dare you not be in this pity party with me, But looking back on it, it was that type of support that I really needed to push through, and that's what I did.
Well, I mean, I think it's one of those things that with trauma, like what you went through, it either breaks someone or it makes you that much stronger, right? And obviously, it took you some time to become that stronger person, but you're there, right? And I think you're an inspiration to a lot of people that have seen what you went through. I mean, how hard was it for you? Think about how hard it was for your parents, right? Because how they must have felt. I mean, you as a parent, me as a parent, I can't even imagine seeing my child like that, right? So, again, I think it goes back to your support system, right? And
Totally.
I don't know if your idea of the pod that you talked to about an IT Direct came from your pod that you had at home and during your entire, this traumatic experience, but the whole idea of this support system is just it's unbelievable. So I just think it's inspirational.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. It's hard on this side of it to feel anything other than what other choice was there. You know what I mean? Like there's a point where some days you just got to put one foot in front of the other. And I remember as a kid, once I kind of got out of there, and there's always tough times. You know what I mean? Like there's different points in time where it was harder than other times. And as you get older, it gets a little bit easier. But I just remember thinking, you just got to do it. You just gotta keep going, and good things will eventually happen. That's and I'm blessed, dude. I literally have thought to myself, a lot of what I have would never. It's hard for me to imagine how I would have ended up staying in Hartford, how I would have ended up starting an IT business, how I would have ended up meeting my wife and having these great kids. Like, I look back and it feels like everything happened to put me on this great path, to have this amazing life, to be able to do so much good and have so many great experiences. So it's, I just think if there's any message I would say is that no matter what happens, there's that saying, whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And you alluded to that earlier. I got to tell you, man, I feel like I've lived that life and I'm still living it. And it's just so true. It's just so true.
No, I mean, it's quite the story. So why don't we'll go from how you became an entrepreneur, how you ended up in IT. So let's talk about the evolution of your businesses, right? So
sure.
How did what you started doing, teaching people computers, end up being IT Direct? Because I think you mentioned, right, like you've had multiple businesses over the years, but sure. How did it kind of evolve? Because what you do today is not what you did originally.
No. Listen, it evolved in a couple ways. For one thing is, we started building computers, which is not really a thing anymore, right? You wouldn't really do too well doing that.
Yeah.
And I think I've just always, you kind of alluded to like the service area before, and it just felt like something that's always felt good to me to be of service and to do things that help people. And so the second business I had in high school, New Age Computing, was very similar, a rudimentary version, but sort of similar of IT Direct. And I really enjoyed that, but then I went to college to be a lawyer. But again, here's just sort of a side funny note is, even in college, as I'm theoretically telling everyone I'm going to be a lawyer, I'm a political science major, I need to make some money. So I open up a cellular phone and paging store, to make some, like, what I mean? Just like crazy stuff that you would, anyway. So I kind of took a little bit of a detour into that retail store. And then I did a multi-level marketing thing for like a little bit, all when I was in college. And by the way, those things all helped to shape who I ended up becoming. So those, I learned I learned how to sell. I learned how to manage inventory. I learned, retail is tough, So I learned about that. And then, I just ended up coming back to Hartford to help my mom out. And, in her office, I was doing some computer stuff for her and ended up helping her restructure the office. In doing that, I ended up meeting this guy who owned a company in West Hartford. And he's like, I need some help with my computers. So I kind of go ostensibly just as a project to help him with his computers, which ends up turning into a full-time gig. And I'm become their IT director for this company. And after 2 years of doing that, I just realized, you know something? I prefer to be on the engine than in any other part of the business.
And you had finished your undergrad degree at this point. No.
I you know something, I finished my junior year, and about halfway through second semester junior year, I realized I'm not going to be a lawyer. It's not happening. So I wanted to get out. I wanted to end school early. And so
how did that decision go over with your parents?
Yeah, not great. So, well, I mean, here's the funny part about it is that I had my senior year of high school, I had taken some classes at Trinity in high school. I had a bunch of AP credits. So if you looked at my credits, with a bit of effort, I could have graduated early. So I went to the dean at Tufts to try and make this plan happen. He did not like this plan. There was some 8-semester rule baloney that I just didn't understand. And I was like, but I can get the credits. And I'm a little bit stubborn. And I just, listen, I wanted to finish, but I didn't really need it. Or at least that's how I felt. And I said, listen, either you guys let me do this thing in one more semester and get all the credits, or I'm just done. And so I ended up being done. And my parents were not happy at all when I told them, which of course I waited to the very last minute because that's not something you want to bring up in May when you get home. So it's like August, 2 weeks or a week before I'm supposed to go back. And I told them, and, not happy. My dad was like, I hope you don't think you're going to be coming back here and living off of us. I was like, nope, got an apartment in Boston. And sort of made it happen. But anyway, so I never went back, ended up coming back, doing the IT thing. And then I just decided it was, so it was right after 9/11, I was like, you know what? I want to own my own thing. And so I basically went to the owner of that company who I reported to already. So I became very friendly with them. It was maybe a 60, 65 person firm. And I just basically was like, listen, I got a way to save the company a bunch of money. We're going to outsource the whole IT department. And he's like, but isn't that your department? I'm like, it is, but here's the good news. You're going to outsource it to me. And so I ended up flipping that company into IT Direct's, first real customer. And talk about hustle. I knew this was coming. So I had been hustling, building up customers while I was working full time and doing something that you could do at 24 that you really can't do in the rest of your life, which is get up early, go to a client, go to the office, go to the McDonald's drive-through after work, go to another client, work till 10, get up at 5, get up at 4. So it was tough. So that was it. And I, flipped that. And that was really the beginning of IT Direct, which was just me and a couple of clients and a desk in my apartment in Hartford.
And that was what year?
2002.
So 18 years ago.
Yes, 18 years ago.
So 18 years of owning your own business, including, like basically starting from nothing.
Yeah.
You get married during that time.
Yep.
You have 2 kids during that time.
Also true.
That's a lot. And as someone who's I've owned my own business, right? And I didn't have a family at that point. Like I was just married, I didn't have kids. I knew how much work it was. It's exhausting, right? So how you went from no employees to how many employees today?
Mid 60s.
And you went from your first client to probably what, hundreds, thousands? I don't know.
No, so we're very, very deeply involved with our clients. So it's maybe 140, 150.
Okay, so hundreds of clients.
Yeah.
When you talk to people, right? Like, because I went to school for IT, right? So people are always like, oh, you can fix computers, right? Like I'm having a problem with my computer. Can you come over and fix that? Right? Like, you always get that question.
Yeah.
But what are some of the things that you guys do for your clients at this point, right? So like, how did you were building computers originally, right? And then you were supporting people's computers. Sure. But like, what does that really mean? Like you don't build computers for people anymore. Like you said, you just buy computers because they're mass produced,
Sure.
What do you guys do? Like what's something you do for a typical client?
So what I realized when I was working at Consulting Environmental Engineers and running the IT team and whatever was that when we were good, once all the infrastructure was built and we kind of like got things humming, we weren't, honestly, we weren't really that busy. We were looking for things to do. I was getting involved in marketing and sales because we had to think, there was stuff to do. You had to babysit it, no doubt. But once we had it built right and we were managing it right, there was support tickets here and there, but for the most part, I would say we were only 60% busy. And so after a while, it just sort of occurred to me that, I bet if I put together a team of people, we could support a bunch of other businesses like this, save them the money from having these IT people that were on site who, listen, we were good at what we knew, but it was very apparent to me pretty quickly that after about a year and a half, I was becoming very, very good at what we had and very, very unfamiliar with everything else the IT world had to offer.
Right.
And so as we look to the future, we started to have to bring in outside experts. And I thought to myself, just doesn't make a lot of sense. I've got an IT team who's not fully utilized, but we're paying outside consultants because we don't have all the experience because we're too busy kind of dealing with our own stuff. I was like, what if I built a team that helped lots of other companies so we could learn and always be learning and bring this individual knowledge and this collective support to companies for less than they have to pay to build their own IT department, but that level of quality. And so that's kind of been the mission of IT Direct, was to partner with companies and say, listen, we are going to be the IT department. I mean, very high level of service. That's why we don't have that many customers. Our relationships with our customers are extremely deep. We're involved in their business. We're involved in their IT. Like it's strategic. It's tactical, certainly day to day, but it's a strategic partnership to help drive their business forward. That's the vision that I saw many, many years ago. And, it's been great because technology has moved towards us. When we first started, the idea of remote controlling someone's computer, which I've been doing from the beginning or nearly the beginning with different tools, people were like, how are you doing that? I remember when we first got started having debates with people about whether or not it was smart to have email on your phone. People would be like, I never need to get email on my phone. I get it at my desk at the office. So technology has moved and become so much more integral that having the right amount of skill set, let alone, by the way, cybersecurity, backup and DR, cloud. I mean, all these things didn't really exist back in 2002. All of that. So what IT Direct does is we partner with companies to help them manage that whole entire process to make that technology work for them.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think for people listening, right? If you work for a big company, Fortune 500 company, yes, they're going to have their own IT firm, right? But there's a lot of small and mid-sized companies that really have no idea. They don't know what to do or where to start. And it sounds like you're one of the people that can really help people with that. So that's super interesting.
That's right.
So let's talk a little bit about just as far as owning your own business, right? Like I love to hear from entrepreneurs, like what's been the biggest success of your time with IT Direct and your biggest failure with IT Direct?
It's a great question. I think they're actually my biggest success might be overcoming my biggest failure. So I'm going to go with that approach, and I'll think if something else comes up. But one of the things that I tell people when we talk about IT Direct is that to me, there was really two IT Directs. There was IT Direct from 2002 when we started, January 2002, till maybe the summer of 2009. And then there's IT Direct from like the fall of 2009 to today. And they're really two different companies. And my biggest, listen, a failure, it's tough to call it a failure, but my biggest kind of mistake, I would say, was when I first got started. I made the two huge mistakes. One was trying to retain too much control, number one. And number two, believing that we would be very successful by focusing inward and trying to be the best we could be internally. So focusing on internal processes, trying to make everything run as seamlessly as possible. And those two things stunted our growth and really kept us capped. The way that I realized in hindsight that I kept control was I would generally hire what you would consider B players, right? People that wouldn't challenge me. They were smart, no question about it, but not pushing me forward. They were willing to just sort of stay in line and go along to get along. Yeah, I think that's somewhat fair to say. And when I realized later on that was not how we were going to ultimately be successful, how we were going to be successful was focusing on customer needs, not inwardly. Right. And number two, bringing in people who were going to challenge and push me and help the company grow to the next level. And so I think my biggest mistake was taking so long and doing it so many wrong ways to realize that. And then my biggest success, because I think it led to everything else, was changing that mindset and saying, you know what, I am going to hire people that challenge me, people that honestly, they scare me, not in like a security way or anything like that, but scare me in a way of like, well, if I hire Nick's super smart. He's going to challenge my ideas. He's going to try and push the company forward. And I think making those hires for sure, made everything better for IT Direct and led us to where we are today.
So what happened in the summer / fall of 2009 that made you change your mind? Like, what was the shift?
That's funny. So the shift started earlier. It just took a long time to kind of execute it. But I think the year before, I went to my first Entrepreneurs Organization event. I know you mentioned you saw I volunteered there. So one of my clients brought me to this EO event, and I'll never forget. It was at Salute in Hartford in the back. And I remember sitting in the back, and whoever was doing the presentation was like, how many people here feel like they make a really good living? So, business owners, a bunch of people raised their hand. And on paper, I was making, a six-figure income. And so they said, okay, well, how many weeks a year do you work? Write that down. So I write down. How many hours a week do you typically work? So I write that down. So it's like, okay, take those weeks, multiply it by those hours, take those hours and divide it into that great amount of money you think you're making, and figure out where you fall on this chart. And I remember they put up this slide, and at the top of the scale is Bill Gates, like $1 million a minute or whatever it was back then. And at the very bottom was like a service, like a server at a restaurant, pre-tips, like sub minimum wage, So I'm like, not there. So I started working my way up the thing, and I did not have to go very far. I was just above a fast food cashier based on my hourly working rate. And I remember that hitting me like a ton of bricks. And two things became clear. Number one was when I thought about the trajectory I was on, how much harder I was working to not really even make any more. And, here I am now in 2008. So now I'm about 31 years old. And I realized I've been saying my whole life that family's number one. I want to have a wife. I want to have kids. I want to do that. Well, what kind of wife and kids is going to be with somebody who's working this much all the time with no hope in sight of it going any other way? So that really opened up my eyes. And I joined the Entrepreneurs Organization. I decided it was time to make a change. I made a decision to change, hired someone to help me kind of write a better business plan. And that basically took me until the summer of 09 to kind of get it all together and execute the plan. And then I began the plan with hiring some sales staff, and I hired some new people, like I just alluded to earlier. And that really launched in 09. And so if you look at kind of the story of IT Direct pre-09, it's a story of initial rapid growth and then plateau-ish, some a little down, some a little up. And then from 2009 to now, we're, I think, averaging 20% year-over-year growth for the whole time. So it's just been a totally different trajectory, a whole lot more fun, a whole lot more interesting than it was leading up to that.
No, I think that's a powerful story about how you had this epiphany, at this event, right, where you're like, wow, it's working, but it's not, right? Yep. And I mean, to have a business as long as you've had, that's very successful. I mean, you see all the stats, right, about how many small businesses go away in the first 5 years or even the first year. So the fact that you've been around since 2002 is pretty impressive in by itself. So let's talk a little bit about the volunteering, right? Because you mentioned EO, right? You do some other volunteer work as well. So how has giving back to the community and the philanthropic work, how has that been a part of who you are as a business owner now, and as a father and as a husband and just someone who's part of the community?
Yeah, listen, I think that you talked about kind of the support before, and I think the growing up in this kind of environment that I grew up in a supportive kind of, listen, I have 3 younger brothers. It was loud, it was competitive, it was boisterous, it was all that, but ultimately there was a lot of love and support. And I would do anything for my brothers, and I feel the same way in return. And so I think that part of service, of looking out for other people, honestly, it's been part of the business growth, and it's also led to a lot of the community work. And look, part of it is just seeing it around. My grandfather, both of my parents have been very involved in our synagogue, involved in the law school, involved in the dental association. My mom's been on the Mission of Mercy, which does kind of free dental work for people for a long time. I've seen my parents, volunteering and doing charitable work my entire life. So that kind of opened my eyes to it. And I don't know, I've always felt that I wanted to make an impact. And the impact is not just for me. I want to make things better. I want to leave things better than I found them in every which way. And I think giving back to the community is part of it. And it's that's really it. I just one little quick plug and story for my mom to give you an idea of like how deep this goes. When we used to go on walks in our neighborhood, and we grew up in West Hartford, so this is not, it's not a terrible neighborhood. My mom would always bring a bag, not because we had a dog, but because she would pick up trash on the walk that we would just go by just to make our neighborhood, that much cleaner. That's the type of example, that I saw growing up and that I, wanted to emulate. And I hope that I've been able to at least do some small portion of what they were able to do.
No, I love that. And again, you learn a lot. We don't want to admit it when we're little, how much we learn from our parents, right? Or even when we're older, but we learn a lot from our parents, and it's and your family. So I to tell her thank you for doing that. So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the Made in America podcast. So
sure.
I think it's less than 2 years since you've had this, right? I think you started, I want to say 2019. If I'm
2019. Yeah, man. It's not even been a year.
In 2019, you started the Made in America podcast.
Hey, before we move on to Made in America, which I love talking about, let me just say one thing. I do want to give a giant plug to the Entrepreneurs Organization.
Okay.
I did volunteer for that. My family did a lot for me in the underpinning, but to learn how to be a good business person, and not just good at business, but holistically a good business person. EO, which is the Entrepreneurs Organization, what they call it, has been invaluable to me and really changed the course of my life and gave me the tools and the knowledge and the understanding to do what we've done at IT Direct and take it to that level, including some of the other volunteer work that we've done. So I just want to make sure I get that out there because I'm just so grateful.
No, that's great.
For what that organization did for me, and that's why I gave back so much to it. So anyway, sorry, go ahead, back to Made in America.
Yeah, so you I think a lot of people would say, okay, why is the CEO of an IT company starting a podcast about stuff that's manufactured in America? So I'd love for you to kind of share. And again, we will, for those that are listening to this live, we'll make sure we share that link, in the show notes for everyone, so you can check out like, okay, what is the Made in America podcast? How do I listen to it, et cetera. What was the genesis of starting this podcast? Because I think from everything I read, this was like your first foray into podcasting.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Into the deep end, right from jump, Nick. And anyone who's interested to certainly reach out to me on LinkedIn or whatnot, and I connect you there. But so look, it was a couple things. One part of it is I'm romantic about manufacturing in Connecticut. Growing up, driving around, Connecticut, Hartford in particular, where I grew up. You see the Colt building everywhere you go. There's kind of remnants of that second industrial revolution that was so big here, Stanley Works and all that stuff, right? UTC, Pratt, the jet engines, Command, Sikorsky, right? Electric Boat, on and on and on. And by the way, IT Direct, when I started IT Direct, I was in Parkville, in Park Place Towers in a high rise, and our first office was in an old manufacturing building. I used to have to drive through that Parkville manufacturing area where Royal Typewriter was and all that stuff. So I just seen that all and always been fascinated and romantic about it. So that's kind of been in the background. And then I'm a big believer in positivity. I think positivity always wins. Sometimes it just takes a lot longer.
Yeah.
Negativity in some ways, for those of you other, I'm big Star Wars fans. So Star Wars fans out there, the dark side to me is negativity and being mean and being bad. You can get power from it, and it's faster, but it's corrosive and it doesn't last as long. The good, right, is more long lasting and a lot more rewarding, but it's a lot more work. And so I've just believed in that. And I've been in the business community in Connecticut now, owning my own business for 18 years, and certainly been a part of it for even longer than that. And I just am always so surprised at how negative we can be. It's just, there's just no end. It seems no bottom to the depth of negativity, and to the point where if I gave someone 99 positive facts and one negative fact, they would just be talking about that one negative fact.
Agreed.
They might glance over. So that's been in the background too. And I think I've been talking about it one-on-one or one-to-many in some cases. And then I just last year, I've been more and more vocal about it, reaching out to some of the business groups, bigger business groups in Connecticut, and trying to make my voice heard on that concept of, let's talk a lot more about the positivity and a lot less about the negativity. And the thing I always tell people is, I think by objective metrics, IT Direct has been a successful business, just objectively. And even with that, and knowing how much good we do for a lot of people a lot of the time, you could literally spend all day, every day, talking about, looking about, and trying to fix the bad things that happen at IT Direct, right?
Yeah.
Down to every little thing. But I believe if that's all we did, we wouldn't actually get better. People would just be disheartened, they would quit, and they would leave. Whereas if we focus on the things we're doing well, do more of them, acknowledge the other things. I'm not saying ignore them, acknowledge them, but put them in their due place and keep focusing and talking about the positive. Likewise, we'll get a lot more of that. I've seen it work in my business and in countless others in this state, my clients, non-clients, and people I network with all over the country, and frankly, all over the world. And so earlier last year, at this point, someone basically said to me, listen, if you think it's so easy to go out there and share all this positive news, why don't you go do it? And I'm, a little bit of, I don't know what the right word to describe me on that front is, but listen,
a little competitive.
Let's go with that. Competitive. And I felt like I was challenged on something I believe deeply in.
Right.
And I said, you know what? I do believe, I often, people will hear me say, we're the solution we've been looking for. And I was just thinking to myself, part of the problem or part of the solution, Ari. And so I said, let's do it. So we decided to kind of spin up this podcast that was going to talk about positivity in Connecticut. I'm super romantic about manufacturing. It's an area we know about from our business, and I know it's doing well. And so I was like, perfect.
Yeah.
Let's put it together. And so it's called Made in America, but we really focus on Connecticut businesses and Connecticut success stories. And I said, I'm going to interview somebody at once a week for a year. So we do 52 episodes talking about positive things that are happening in the business community in Connecticut. I don't know how many weeks. We launched our first one, I think the last week of August or something. So we're 6-7 months into this thing. And it's been a rip-roaring success. So many people have come up to me, both in live events, and people have reached out on LinkedIn and through the podcast to be like, this is awesome. I love that you're doing this. I've been waiting for someone to do it. Like, I've got something, and there's no shortage of guests. I mean, none. Like, we are booked up through March. We've got, everyone that comes in sends more people. It's just been super exciting and super well received, and I'm proud to be a small part of it.
Yeah, I mean, we could spend an hour talking about what I call, and it was not my term that coined, the Connecticut comeback, and how we all need to work together to try to make this happen. Because I'm also a proud Connecticut resident for my whole life, and I want to see the state do well. So we are definitely in sync on that. But
yep.
So I guess just a couple questions, then we're almost going to wrap up the show. How has it been being a podcaster? Like, I'll ask two questions about it. What has been the biggest surprise from the podcast, and what's been the hardest thing about the podcast?
The hardest, let me go with the second one first. The hardest thing about the podcast was starting. Man, it's nerve-wracking. And you've been through it. It's super duper nerve-wracking, getting it going. I mean, was fortunate that I was able to invite some people on in the beginning that I knew.
Yeah, that makes it easier.
Yeah, it does in some ways, right? Because the content, but In other ways, it's like you're more nerve-wracking because you're like want to not impress, but you don't want to flop.
You want to do
right
well.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that was the hardest part, no doubt about it. And then what was the other? What was the hardest part?
I mean, what's gone like really well that's really kind of surprised you, right?
Oh,
Like
surprised.
what's been something like a big success that you didn't expect?
How quickly people jumped on board. That shocked me, especially the context within which I started, right, Nick? So I'm starting it with this context of I want to turn the idea around. I want to get the momentum going in the other direction. And I had no idea there were so many people out there that felt the way I felt. And I remember early on, we reached out to Marty Guay. I don't know if you know who Marty is, but he's a big VP at Stanley Black & Decker. He's kind of been tasked with really booting up their whole Hartford R&D strategy, the manufactory downtown. For people that don't know about it, it's this big global art research and development center for what's called Industry 4.0, the next industrial revolution with Internet of Things and artificial intelligence and VR. And it's very cool that they built downtown. So he's kind of building that and expanding their partnerships. And I was like, this is perfect. He's never going to do it. But like, nothing ventured, nothing gained. You know what I mean? I didn't get where I was by not being bold. So we reached out, and shockingly, he was like, absolutely. And then I was like, does he know he has to come to my office to do it? Because we don't take this thing on the road. Yeah. And he showed up, and it was great. And that was just one kind of example. And it's just been example after example of people, like I said before, reaching out. I went to an event maybe a month and a half after we started, and randomly, the person who was doing the emceeing at the event saw me and was like, I don't know how many people know, but there's this great new podcast celebrating manufacturing and business in Connecticut. And I mean, I was like, what? Didn't even know this person listened. I mean,
that is funny.
So that's been the biggest surprise. And quite frankly, Nick, the biggest piece of encouragement.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think and again, we'll make sure we get the link to it in the show description, but it's a high quality production, right? I mean, you do the video, you have the nice setup in your office. I mean, it's definitely, it's like a beautiful setup on how you do the recording, which I think is part of the reason, and it's got the whole nice intro. I mean, you did a really good job with it. So it's professionally done, which I think always helps, I think something like that just take off even more. Right. So I didn't start this as a live show. I started this as a podcast, May of, I can't remember when now. It's like almost 2 years old this May. I just started off as a podcast. I didn't start doing the live show on LinkedIn and YouTube until end of November last year. So everything evolves, right? So which is I think is always fun. So I have two.
Before write those down, but I'm just going to flip it back at you. I love this concept, full potential. You and I sort of connected a while ago, and just we're sort of talking offline, and I'm super happy to be on here because I think, to your point, we've got to support each other and raise the thing. But what kind of got you doing this?
Yeah, now and I feel like I'm being interviewed now on my own show. So this is like the podcast guru is interviewing me. I mean, it really started. Like I said, it started as just a podcast, and I didn't have a website or anything. And I wanted to, I've been kind of like you. I've been blessed to have a lot of mentors throughout my career that have helped me be where I am today. Right, my family, friends, and then some amazing managers throughout like my almost 20-year career at this point. And my thought was, my wife and I have a nonprofit, and I was thinking, like, what's another way that we can give back to try to help people? And I always thought, I loved hearing people's career stories. I just loved hearing, like, well, how did you go from this to that, right? And as I told my career story, people kept asking me, like, how did you end up going from IT to being an entrepreneur, back to IT, now you're in HR, like, do you not know what you want to do when you grow up, or do you have a plan, right? And I would say to answer that question, it's a little bit of both, right? But so as I kind of kept hearing other people's career stories and my career story, I'm like, I really want to just share these with people. And that's how the podcast got started. And to your point, I started off with friends, right? Like I started off interviewing friends on my podcast, and then I ended up interviewing some strangers, and did that for, like I said, until last November. And then LinkedIn had the live feature as like a beta. And I am like, hey, I'm going to apply and see if I can get it. And I did. And I thought to myself, well, I'm going to stop doing the podcast. I used to do the podcast just using Anchor, like on any random night, record it and then release it. I'm going to stop doing that. And I'm going to make a live show every Sunday where I'm going to interview a guest every Sunday. And I just turn that into the podcast. So it's not really any more work. It's just another medium. And I love interviewing people. It's just, I have a blast doing it. So I have guests lined up until the end of June, every Sunday night, except I think one when I'm going on vacation. And just all people, like entrepreneurs, nonprofits, educators, corporate people, like really all types of careers. And every single time I interview someone, I learn something like that's so inspirational or so cool, or like, wow, I can't believe they did that or they did this. And it's been I have people ask to be on the show like all the time, right? Which always surprises me. They're like, hey, I want to be on the show. I'm like, okay, cool. I have people emailing me like, hey, I think my boss should be on the show. I'm like, okay, awesome. So it's been a lot of fun, and I love the I haven't gotten to the point where I don't take questions for the guests live. I think we could probably eventually do that if we wanted to. We haven't done that yet. We're just doing this so far, but it's been a lot of fun.
It's awesome, dude. I love it, and I think I think part of what I love about the Made in America podcast, sort of similarly, is some people sort of share their experiences and their knowledge, and I think that the more we share the good things that are happening, the more good things we're going to get, and that's why I love it. I'm super happy that you asked me to be on it.
I'm sharing career stories and you're sharing successful business stories. And like, that's it's a similar idea, right? And
yeah.
So we'll end with this then, because I always close the podcast with one question. I know you do your rapid fire, which I've actually done a couple of those with people. It's fun to ask them like question after question, but I'm not going to do it tonight. I just have one final question, which I always ask every guest.
Sure.
What is your advice to help people reach their full potential, right? So what has Ari Santiago done in your career that's helped you be so successful that you would want to share with all my listeners?
Whew, that is a loaded question, Nick. To think about the one thing, man, I'm gonna try to answer it like this, and you tell me if we want another answer at it. But if I think about, well, first of all, I don't think I've reached my full potential yet, so I'm still working on that, but on a good path to get there. I think what's allowed me to be to make as much of an impact as I have so far, which is kind of how I measure success, in positive impact on the people that I've been able to work with, positive impact on the clients that have been able to work with us, positive impact on the vendors and the partners we work with, positive impact on my family. Which allowed me to do that was following my passion. Leaving Tufts, with a perfectly fine GPA and no other problem other than realizing that I believe that we only have one go round at this life. Yeah. And we should make this life the best life it can be. And we can do that only by doing things we really want to do and that we're passionate about, and not wasting our most important resource, which is time. And so, right. Being able to follow my passion, to go after, kind of being in business and going into technology and just doing that, because, and this as much as I do, that no matter how successful we are or what we do, there's tough days. There's tough days getting there. We make mistakes. We have to pick ourselves up again. We pick a road and it's the wrong road. We got to back it up and go down the other way. And you can't, at least I look at it and say, I don't see how I would have been able to do that if I wasn't doing something that I loved so much and that I got so much joy out of, and been able to evolve, into where I am now, and honestly believe that I am on my path to, over the course of my life, reaching my full potential as a father, as a business person, and as a participant in the community. I really do feel like I'm on my path, and the only reason I'm on my path is because I've been able to follow my passion, which has allowed me to put in the work and the effort and a lot of work, put it in to constantly get better and do what I've done. So.
And you've had an amazing support group to help you follow your passion, right? That's helped enable you since you were a kid, which is so big. So thank you again for making time. This was great. I knew it was going to be fun. Interviewing a fellow podcaster interviewer is always a challenge and is always nerve-wracking, because you want to make sure it goes well, and you're like, I hope he likes my questions, right? So thank you for making time. I know how busy you are. your family and the business and all the volunteer work. But thank you, and we'll link to IT Direct on the show description. We'll link to your LinkedIn as well, and then any details around the Made in America podcast will link there as well. But thank you,
Sure.
Ari. Fantastic work. Keep it up. You're an inspiration. Thanks for being on the show.
Thanks, Nick. Appreciate it, buddy.
Talk soon.
Bye-bye.